All right, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for joining what is our fourth and final web forum for PMC's project titled Moving Beyond Population Averages, Patient-Centered Principles for a Personalized Medicine Research Agenda. If that sounds good to you, you are in the right place.
And since we are now getting started, we're going to put everyone on mute. And then later on, during the discussion portion, we will indicate to you how to unmute your line.
So, line muted.
For those of you joining for the first time, and for those of you who haven't joined a web forum in a while, we wanted to go ahead and reintroduce ourselves. I'm Cynthia A, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Public Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. And for the purposes of the PCORI project that we're going to discuss today, I'm the project lead for the Engagement Award. And I'm joined by my colleague David Davenport, who's PMC's Manager of Public Policy. And he's the project manager for the Engagement Award, and he's actually going to be presenting the second portion of the web forum today. So we have just over 60 attendees for the webinar today. 11 of you are new to the project, so a special welcome to you. Just for the purposes of allowing for a good flow for the discussion today, we're going to talk through the agenda a bit. Because we're going to go for 90 minutes if that's necessary. First, we're going to go through a welcome and introduction and overview period where we will walk through the web forum instructions, give you an overview of the Personalized Medicine Coalition because at least one of you who's participating is not familiar with us or the PCORI Engagement Award. We're going to walk through feedback we received from our last web forum through the participant survey. And then we're going to talk through takeaways from that web forum. Then we'll move forward with our program for today, which is to finalize and vote on proposed principles for a patient-centered research agenda in personalized medicine, and share the next steps of the project where we're going to outline opportunities where you all will have additional engagement with us. We're going to open for a period of discussion on the proposed principles with polling. And one of the reasons why we'll have the option to be able to unmute your line is if you want to provide feedback that's outside of the polling questions that we're putting forward. And then we're going to talk through a online collaboration platform, which was an outgrowth of one of the presentations we had on web forum number 2. It was actually employed by the Cerebral Palsy Research Network to allow them to receive additional feedback on some of the research questions that were a part of their PCORI Engagement Award. And that's something we've decided to use moving forward, and we hope you'll find valuable. And then we'll go through next steps. If you have any additional comments or questions that you have about the project or anything else you would like us to know, we'll have a period for that, and then we'll conclude. So the web forum instructions, I've already neglected them to advance the slides. There's a separate teleconference line, which it seems by now most of you have been able to call into. Your lines are on mute, but we are going to unmute the lines after when we like your input during the discussion period. And so if you'd like to unmute your line, you can press #. When you speak, please announce yourself and be willing to share the mic with others. We do only have 90 minutes for this. We by no means want you to hold back your opinions, but to the extent that you can be brief and let others speak, we'd appreciate it. The WebEx Q&A function is also enabled, so you can ask questions throughout the presentation even when your lines are on mute by using the Q&A function, and this is found on the sidebar on your screen. If you have any other needs for technical assistance, particularly now as you're getting set up, you can send an email to David at ddavenport@personalizedmedicinecoalition.org. We are recording the web forum, and it will be archived for future use for viewing and dissemination by people who weren't able to join us today or people who want to just learn more about the project, and so they're all available on PMC's website under the research portion. And the raise hand feature is disabled, so if you're trying to communicate with us that way, please either send us an email or use the Q&A function instead. So we wanted to level set, given that about a dozen of you are new to the project. The Personalized Medicine Coalition is a 16-year-old nonprofit education and advocacy coalition. We have over 230 members from across the healthcare spectrum. The two largest sectors of our membership are research and clinical care organizations and patient advocacy organizations. And the way that all of us collectively define personalized medicine is as an evolving field in which physicians use diagnostic tests, often molecular, to determine which medical treatments will work best for their patients. And then by combining the data from those tests with an individual's medical history, circumstances, and values, healthcare providers and patients can develop targeted treatment and prevention plans. And so many of you know that when personalized medicine is often categorized by precision medicine, the emphasis is on the first part of the definition of using diagnostic tests to understand the biological underpinnings of disease or what treatment might work best. But we've really been focusing this project largely with your help and input on the second half of the definition, so we can really get at how we can combine medical history, circumstances, and values of the individual person, and really make sure that we're injecting that into the conversation about what treatments and interventions would work best for you. So we wanted to give you a bit of a project overview so you understand the goals of the project, particularly those who are new, but we realize it's been a couple of months since our last call, so we wanted to recap the overall goals just so you can best shape your comments during the discussion period. The goal of the project is to publish a research agenda by August of this year in the form of a white paper that's driven by patients and patient representatives and identifies areas for further research that will improve the delivery of personalized medicine to patients. The resulting white paper that we'll have at the end of the project is going to include a summary of the principles that we've developed over the last year through these web forums, and a summary of an in-person meeting that we're going to be holding in March of this year. And we're going to be outlining research questions that we believe, with the help of all of you, are going to improve the delivery of personalized medicine. And we call it a research agenda, and I appreciate that one of the project participants on a previous call corrected us. And when we were referring to it as a research agenda and implied that the white paper is really only going to be geared toward toward researchers. And it's not, that can be further from the truth, so we wanted to clarify and just let you know that at the end of the day, this is really going to be a reflection of what patients indicated that they want most from personalized medicine. And while we hope that some researchers will take up the mantle and carry some of these projects forward, it's by no means intended to only be something that's led and utilized by researchers. So the funding for this project is from the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. It was in the form of a Eugene Washington Engagement Award, and we received the award in 2018. And for those of you who don't know what a Eugene Washington Engagement Award is, it's given to organizations so that they can establish partnerships and build a community equipped to advance patient-centered clinical effectiveness research or patient-centered research that compares outcomes to determine the effectiveness, including risks and benefits, of two or more approaches to healthcare. So with that, I'm actually going to turn the discussion over to David, and he's going to walk through some of the feedback we received from the participant survey for web forum number 3. So David?
Thanks, Cynthia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We held our last forum on May 16th, 2019, which was quite a while ago, but still a very good conversation. During the web forum, we had about 50 patients, caregivers, advocates, and other representatives from the healthcare community participate. And I would really like to thank everyone for participating in that webinar and providing feedback afterwards, as well as through other opportunities after that web forum. After each of the web forums, we worked to incorporate your feedback and suggestions for how to improve this web forum series. And it appears that after tinkering around with the format on the first few web forums, we got it right last time. The feedback was unanimously positive. Participants found the discussion informative and said they learned something they did not know before the web forum. People said that it was useful for PMC to state the objectives and expectations for the web forum up front. We received feedback that people appreciated the opportunity to receive the discussion questions in advance and to provide feedback afterward. And everyone really appreciated the ample time for open discussion and commented positively on the facilitation. In response to this positive feedback, we decided to keep many of the elements of today's web forum exactly the same. We included the agenda-specific objectives for the web forum and have organized the discussion to achieve these objectives. We kept the 90-minute web forum duration, but decided not to have a guest speaker to allow time for Q&A and live discussion. We scheduled the web forum after polling participants to identify a convenient time that it would allow the greatest participation. We changed the way that participants join the web forum to allow all participants to speak by unmuting their own lines. And finally, we kept the discussion questions for the last web forum open for, that should say, over 9 months. And in advance of today's discussion, we also shared the proposed principles that we'll discuss for feedback and review to engage those who are not able to participate with us live today. During our last web forum, we reviewed proposed principles for the research agenda based on feedback from the previous 2 web forums and discussed additional principles. We talked at length about how research agenda in personalized medicine could be most beneficial to patients and discussed the scope, content, and impact of the final research agenda. You will find that many of the following takeaways are closely reflected in the proposed principles that we shared and that we'll discuss later. Those takeaways include the participants on the previous web forum expanded the definitions for patient values and patient circumstances to enumerate additional aspects related to patient values and patient circumstances that should be considered in the context of personalized medicine. Participants agreed that the agenda should address the education of patients, the education of providers, and improving communication between patients and providers in the context of personalized medicine. Specifically, we should consider shared decision-making as a tool and resource to facilitate this kind of conversation. Participants agreed that access challenges beyond those created by a lack of communication and education should be considered, and this includes research topics that PCORI may not be able to fund, such as affordability or coverage. In addition, on the last forum, we agreed the research agenda should apply across disease areas and not limit its focus to a particular disease area, as well as be inclusive of patients of diverse backgrounds and experiences. Patients participating in the web forum suggested the advisory committee consider which areas the agenda should include and exclude to have the greatest impact. And finally, participants suggested expertise that should be represented on the advisory committee, including expertise in shared decision-making and patient education. Since our last web forum, Cynthia and I spent the second half of 2019 establishing and convening the advisory committee for this project, which will be responsible for guiding the development of the research agenda based on the patient-centered principles we have been developing over the course of this web forum series. Based on feedback received, we used a formal nominations process to select members of the advisory committee. Here, we really wanted to create opportunities for volunteers to take a leadership role and to ensure diverse representation of diseases and perspectives. Thank you to everyone who submitted nominations. We received many more applications than we were expecting, and as a result, we decided to increase the number of patient and caregiver members that we would include in the advisory committee by an additional 6 individuals. Our advisory committee now has 26 members, and over half of that is made up of patients, caregivers, and patient advocacy organization representatives from diverse backgrounds, age groups, and disease areas, including expertise in rare disease, oncology, aging, and health disparities. The remaining advisory committee members are healthcare providers, researchers, 1 industry representative, and 1 payer. Before we move to the discussion of the proposed principles, I thought I would just give a little bit of background on how we arrived at the place we are now. The purpose of these principles, as you have probably gathered, is to identify how research agenda in personalized medicine can be most beneficial to patients by informing the scope, content, and impact of our final research agenda. These principles are based on discussions and feedback we have received during the 3 previous web forums, feedback we received offline related to discussion questions, and then feedback we have received from the advisory committee all over the past 9 months since our last web forum in May. This process has resulted in 9 principles that cover the following themes: defining patient values and circumstances, improving patient and provider communication, improving the education of patients and providers, addressing access challenges, ensuring the final research agenda is representative, and finally, considering how to heighten the impact of the agenda and ensure that the research topics proposed are feasible. And so with that, we will now move to our open discussion. Before we get started, I would like to ask a polling question. Which statement best describes your thoughts about the proposed principles? I would approve the principles as is. I would approve the principles with some minor changes or additions. I have significant changes or concerns I would like to raise, and I have not yet read the principles. And so you'll see that that polling question is now open on your screen. Please take a moment to select the response that best matches how you're feeling right now, and we will use this feedback to determine how we go about with the discussion. Meanwhile, if you have any questions about what Cynthia and I have just covered in the background, feel free to press 4* to unmute your line, and we can take your question at this time. Once again, that's if you have a question, please press 4* to unmute your line. See, while we are waiting for the last few responses to come in, I did want to answer a question that we received during the registration. The question was, will there be a discussion of integrative services for patients? We will not be discussing particular integrative services such as the use of massage therapy, acupuncture, or other non-Western healing practices in particular, but we encourage you to keep in mind this individualized approach to healthcare as we discuss personalized medicine and the principles for this project. Both approaches to medicine try to deliver patient-centered care that considers the entirety of the patient's needs, and we encourage you to use your perspective from an integrated services background to provide feedback on these principles that we've developed for how research agenda and personalized medicine could be most useful to patients. And could we go ahead and close out the poll? All right, and so it seems like the majority of people on this call would approve the principles as is. 20% have minor changes. No one has significant changes or concerns they would like to raise, and 10% or so have not yet read the principles. So what we will do now is I will share my screen, and we will just walk through the principles together, and if at that time you have any feedback that you would like to share about how to improve the language of those principles, we definitely welcome your comments or questions about how particular things came to be included at that time. I'll just make this a little bigger for everyone to see. All right, so our first principle, actually our first two principles relate to defining patient and caregiver values and circumstances. These two principles were really born out of our very first web forum where we shared PMC's definition for personalized medicine, which emphasized components related to a patient's biology, as well as combining that information with a patient's values and circumstances. We were very surprised when we launched this initial question that the majority of people indicated that their values and circumstances mattered just as much, if not more, than their biology. And so because of that, we decided to really drill down and start enumerating the aspects of those definitions of values and circumstances that should be considered. So So far throughout the project, we have gathered that patient-caregiver values includes personal priorities, religious, spiritual values, social and cultural values, including family involvement in care decisions, views around quality of life, privacy concerns, desired level of access to and understanding of personal genetic information, and beliefs about health and personal responsibility. Are there any comments or questions related to patient-caregiver values? And once again, to unmute your line, please press 4-star, or you can ask a question or type a comment using the Q&A box on your screen. All right. The second principle defines patient-caregiver circumstances to include emotional state, socioeconomic situation, race and ethnicity, sex and gender, language, health literacy, ability to work, access to care, access or lack thereof to a caregiver, social support, cognitive abilities, attitude towards illness, such as acceptance of diagnosis or the willingness of the patient to accept help, personality, symptom burden, health-related quality of life, the ability to consent and choose, the relationship with the healthcare provider, the role of a patient as a caretaker, preferences of family members, the treatment setting, whether that be in the community, academic, or another healthcare setting, familiarity with personalized medicine and its benefits, other social determinants of health, and other expressed needs or barriers. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to press 4-star to unmute your line. All right. The third principle for the research agenda is the research agenda would be most helpful if it focused on priorities that help providers in A, identifying and communicating treatment options based on biological differences in the context of patient-caregiver values, and B, understanding patient-caregiver circumstances and presenting treatment options in ways that highlight how a treatment aligns or does not align with those circumstances. In this case, the potential for shared decision-making tools and resources to facilitate those conversations should be explored. Are there any questions or comments? All right. The fourth principle states, the research agenda should address the education of patients directly by considering A, the education of patients as a process over time. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, it's Jill Minlin, I'm so sorry. I just had a very minor comment on section 3, but I couldn't unmute my phone. It's just unusual to have an A without a B. I'm sorry, I'm an attorney and I draft up all the time. So I would either get rid of the A or add a B or just make that last sentence maybe a dash before it or something, but just from a pure drafting standpoint, I just wouldn't have an A without a B.
Okay, thanks for pointing that out. And the reason that's broken down is because with a lot of these, we've received clarifications or comments along the way, and we felt that by including these kinds, that language in with the entire principle, it would kind of dilute like the focus, but by breaking it out, it just highlights that it's a component that should be considered.
Gotcha. And we couldn't come up with any other components maybe for a B? Otherwise, I guess we could just do a dash or something.
Yeah, we can do it.
Yeah, we can do a dash.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if anyone on the line has, any other components that should be considered, feel free to raise them.
Great, thanks.
I wouldn't be surprised at one point if there was a B. And then it got removed.
So number 4, the research agenda should address the education of patients directly by considering A, the education of patients as a process over time and not just at diagnosis, including basic education defining personalized medicine and its benefits, B, how both patients and their providers can improve communication with each other, and C, how to close the gap between patient expectations and the reality of how and when test results and treatment options are delivered. Are there any comments or questions? And once again, to unmute your line, please press 4*.
There was a slight echo in the last couple of minutes. There wasn't before that, but there was in the last 2 minutes.
Okay. Are you still able to understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I'll continue along, and we'll try to figure out what is causing this echo.
Okay. I don't know whether it's just, I don't know if are other people getting echoes too, or is it just me?
We all.
Yeah, we're hearing an echo from your end as well.
Okay.
David, this is Diane, and I had used the Q&A function to add a point to number 2, but I guess that maybe didn't go through. Do you see that in the Q&A function? I was just wrote that for number 2, I would add attitude and preferences about end of life.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we can definitely incorporate that change.
Okay. And I don't know if it would be better to go under 1, if that would be considered a value or a circumstance. They're kind of mushy.
I think that would be more of a value. Would you agree, Cynthia? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. Yeah.
This is Carla. I just had a question about the last item, and I just wondered if there was some discussion about the education of caregivers as well. The fact that even though a patient may receive information, there is, in many cases, a need for a caregiver to also have the information about what the provider is planning. And so, again, I don't quite know where to fit that in, but it just seems like there should be some attention paid to how to support the caregiver as well around the education of the treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for raising that, Carla. I think that's a very good point. And I think we can address that partly by saying the education of patients / caregivers as a process over time. And then also in referencing the patient and caregiver in the remaining parts of that definition. How does that, would that address your comment? We can also pull out something in particular too.
Yes, no, I think that's helpful. I just don't want us to forget about the importance of the caregivers in this process.
Yeah, no, we completely agree, and I think that that's a great addition. Are there any other comments related to item number 4 in the education of patients? All right, so I will move on to principle number 5. And it looks like we were able to figure out what was causing the echo, so thank you for bearing with us. Principle 5, opportunities to educate providers in genomics and varying levels of providers' understandings of genomics and access to resources depending on their health setting, such as the community, academic, or other, should be considered.
I'm sorry, I couldn't get in the add to number 4 in time.
Oh, no worries.
Can we say something about accommodating learning styles or something. I mean, we're talking about sort of intervals about when to deliver education, but not the mode or format, and not the sort of timing of kind of just-in-time education that really sort of meets different learning styles.
Okay. I think we can add that as a sub-bullet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Marina Baroff with the Clarity Foundation.
Marina, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
So educational tools and resources should address different learning styles. Does that accurately capture your comment?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. The only other thing is, again, kind of just-in-time learning as opposed to when it's delivered at sort of these kind of scheduled data dump intervals.
I think that might be captured in circumstances.
Okay. Scroll back up to.
Cynthia, you wanted to?
No, I think we did. Maybe not.
I think you might be thinking of familiarity with personalized medicine and its benefits. But we did throw in there, in one of our first discussions, there was a lot of talk about how the education of a patient, it's just not at diagnosis, and oftentimes they're in like a diagnosis shock and unable to absorb information. And so really that education needs to be a process over time, and that's how we ended up including the language of process over time. And what I'm gathering is that it needs to be more than just a process over time, but kind of a continual reciprocal effort between the patient and the provider.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And it looks like we have a question that has come in with a suggestion to add health literacy for number 4. So I think what you are referencing, Deborah, is the latest edition. I think we can work it in there. Educational tools and resources should address different learning styles and levels of health literacy. And it looks like that works for you. Great, thank you, Deborah. Moving on to Principle 5, opportunities to educate providers in genomics and varying levels of providers' understandings of genomics and access to resources, depending on their health setting, whether that be in the community, academic, or other, should be considered. There was an emphasis that it's not just the education of patients, but providers themselves often have difficulties, especially in the community setting, of accessing resources to bring personalized medicine to their patients. And that is really what this principle is trying to address. Are there any comments or questions related to this?
This is Carla Easter, and I was wondering if we could also add to that something about recognizing the different disciplines, or at least different training, the different training that healthcare providers have will not only make it that the setting is not only important, it's also who is providing the health. And so I don't know if there's some way to talk about, for instance, whether you're talking about someone who's an oncologist, who is a family practitioner, a nurse, or, you know, just different disciplines, how we can address that their needs will be different depending on the perspective that they're approaching the care.
Right. I think we can work that in with this phrase.
Yep.
Does that work for you? And how
yes.
adding, and so for people who aren't on the visual portion, I added the clarification that these resources, depending on their health setting and health specialization, should be considered.
Yes, thank you.
Do you prefer specialization or discipline? Do you think?
I guess I was trying to get at the fact that you also have, you know, when we think about discipline, we often think about physicians, but in some cases you may have nurses or even a pharmacist or a physician's assistant who might be participating in the treatment. So I don't know how to cover that more broadly.
We can put an EG with an extra specialization or discipline, just as you described, e.g. physician or pharmacist, physician's assistant.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
Line unmuted.
Hi, this is Diane. I'm just wondering if genomics is it's a broad word, and I'm not sure what access to resources means, but I just want to make sure that we're including in that they the education of the tools that are available today for their, meaning the translation of the genomics, the tests that are available, the tools, you know, and I don't know if we specifically need to call those things out or whether genomics, you know, brings that up.
I think
genomics is
qualify under access to resources and put, for example, translational tools.
And existing resources.
And existing resources. Does that help?
What does and existing resources mean?
So existing educational resources or existing translational tools for implementation.
Okay.
I guess it would probably be more clear if we just put access to existing and new resources, such as translational tools.
Okay.
So what that looks like now is opportunities to educate providers in genomics and varying levels of providers' understanding of genomics and access to existing and new resources, e.g. translational tools, depending on their health setting, whether that be the community, academic, or other setting, and health specialization or discipline should be considered.
Maybe rather than translational tools, like I don't know how we say this, clinical tools, or meaning tools that they can use right now that aren't just esoteric, you know, I mean, genomics, right? We can do certain things, but we can't yet do other things. But the fact that they can actually be using these tests and
and I think we might be getting into perhaps even a potential research topic or something that we could discuss at the March meeting.
Okay.
I think if we leave it broad enough to just say existing and new resources and translational tools, we can leave it up to the healthcare providers who are in the room to really develop the tools that identify those tools that should be more taken advantage of. Are there any more comments or questions before we move on to item 6?
Hello, Sean McConnell here.
Hi, Sean.
Hey, I had a question about to what extent would the personalized medicine field also incorporate augmented or artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms and the preferences of the provider and the patient to engage with those tools and approaches?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Artificial intelligence and has, I think, come up once before, but also we did receive a number of questions related to, and I'm scrolling to the very bottom now, related to data collection, data integration and interoperability, informed consent, patient concerns related to data privacy and access. All of these topics were previously raised in the context of we think these are important, but we're not quite sure how the agenda could or should address these. And so we threw in language under Principle 9 for the advisory committee should consider areas the agenda must include and exclude to have the greatest impact, including the feasibility of proposed research topics. We mentioned a number of those issues, and I think that we could also add artificial intelligence here so that we know that it's something that is of interest and on patients' minds, but something that perhaps don't have an adequate level of understanding right now to really grasp how a research agenda should tackle artificial intelligence for personalized medicine.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah. I will add that in. So we were at item number 6. The agenda should consider how to use oncology as a prototype for patient and provider education in disease areas beyond oncology. So this came out of our most recent discussion where we decided that the research agenda should focus across disease areas, but at the same time we didn't want to ignore all of the progress that has been made in personalized medicine in oncology. And many people on the webinar thought that there were lessons, especially related to patient and provider education, that could be adopted in other disease areas. And so that is how we ended up with this principle. Are there any comments or questions? And once again, to unmute your line and speak, press 4 stars. All right, moving on to item number 7. Access challenges beyond those created by a lack of communication and education should also be considered. This includes timely access to novel and/or off-label therapies as a result of affordability, insurance coverage, and provider availability. This includes strategies for mitigating inequity and the proportion of variants of uncertain significance reported for individuals of non-Western European ancestry or ethnicity compared with those of Western European ancestry or ethnicity. Are there any comments or questions? And once again, to unmute your line and speak, please press 4 star. All right. Oh, looks like we might have gotten something in the Q&A. Educational tools include digital marketing. So I think, Joan, what I'm getting from your comment is that when we reference educational tools, we should also reference online resources that are available for patients. Yeah, and we'll come back to that later, time permitting. So if there aren't any comments or questions on item 7 related to access challenges, we'll move on to item 8. And here the version is a little different from what we shared initially because we did receive feedback in advance of today's webinar on how to improve this principle. And so I will read it as it was suggested we amend it and tell you how it changed. So the research agenda should be representative of diverse patient needs, diseases, backgrounds, and experiences, e.g. stage of life, disease trajectory, socioeconomic status, and health literacy level, including patients underrepresented in medical research. Originally, the principle read, the research agenda should be holistic. However, this participant suggested representative as a better word to really describe what we were trying to pull out from this principle. And then she also shared effort related to patient engagement and quality measurement and to establish a rubric where they actually defined some qualities of representativeness, which included stage of life, disease trajectory, socioeconomic status, and health literacy level, and thought that it would be very helpful for there to be some mirroring between these principles and that initiative. And that is why I've incorporated those language edits here. Some additional qualifications for this principle and underneath. Specifically, the research agenda should apply across disease areas. As we mentioned, that was that was a point that was well agreed upon during the last web forum. Representativeness includes considering how the research agenda can apply to additional disease areas as new personalized medicine treatments come to market. Here we wanted to make sure that the research agenda has longevity to it, and it's not just focused on disease areas where there are personalized medicines, but since there is so much innovation happening in this space and more treatments coming to market, that the research agenda would be able to address patients in those disease areas as well. And then finally, representativeness also includes potential research topics related to the management of comorbidities. On the last webinar, there was discussion of how there's a lot of difficulties, especially when you have comorbid conditions, and getting the right resources from your provider and having a discussion with them that really accounts for all of the challenges that come with dealing with comorbid conditions. Are there any comments or questions related to principle number 8? Once again, to unmute your line, please press 4*.
Hello. Hi, this is Trish Brennan. Can you hear me?
Hi, Trish. Yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry, it took me a while. The 4* wasn't working on my end for a while, so I'm sorry to do this, but I really wanted to go back to a previous comments that were made related to provider education. And it may have been implied, but when we talk about the healthcare setting as community or academic, I think it needs to be more specifically articulated that there has to be education in training of providers. And I would also include in that list genetic counselors as, you know, a primary provider of genomic education of patients. So while I see in the parentheses we say community and academic, you know, coming from UCSF, I consider us an academic medical center, but not, I'm not currently involved in educating providers. So I just think we need to make a distinction or perhaps clarify.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we can add a clarification below. And here's what I propose. So we can add a bullet that says, this includes how to educate providers and other healthcare professionals in training, including genetic counselors and nurse navigators. Does that capture what,
Yeah, I'm not really sure what nurse navigators mean, but I just wanted to make sure when we were including above disciplines that we don't exclude genetic counselors, because as I'm sure most of us on the call know, the limited number of genetic counselors that are being educated is hugely problematic in this field, and I just don't think we want to lose that if we're considering a research agenda, particularly as it relates to addressing diverse populations, which I think we talk about a little bit later.
Got it. Yeah, I think we can definitely add genetic counselors to the list of particular disciplines and healthcare professionals.
But I think you just erased the other part, which is the training. You know, the educators in training is really important because there's a huge black hole and lots of people. Oh, there you go. Thanks.
We're just saying that's,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for bearing with my computer editing.
No problem.
I'll get that bullet back in there later. So coming back down to, I think we were on the last one, which we already raised. So the last principle, as I mentioned, is the advisory committee should consider areas the agenda must include and exclude to have the greatest impact, including the feasibility of proposed research topics. On our last web forum, there was a discussion of how we can make the agenda most impactful, and there was consensus that the people on the call really didn't feel like they had the expertise to make that decision, and so they really wanted to pass that responsibility on to the advisory committee. And with that in mind, we actually do plan to discuss that with the advisory committee in one of our upcoming calls. And then since we've received a number of feedback on potential other topics that people are wondering if it would be useful for the agenda to consider, we've enumerated those down below, including artificial intelligence, which was a suggestion we received earlier today. Okay, and Diane, we'll incorporate your line edit there before we finalize this.
Okay.
Are there any additional comments or questions about the proposed principles? Once again, to unmute your line, please press 4*. All right, so with that, I will take a moment to save this, and I'll stop sharing my screen, and we'll resume the presentation.
This is great. Thank you all very much for providing your comments.
Yes, thank you very much. And we'll be sure to follow up with everyone after the call with the final version. So now that we have finalized these principles, woohoo, thank you so much.
You should see the smile on David's face. I wish you can.
So during our second web forum, we hosted the Cerebral Palsy Research Network, who had conducted a similar project to ours to develop a research agenda for PCORI and cerebral palsy, where they share their success using Code Digital and developing and refining research topics. Following interest from previous web forums, we have since decided to use Code Digital, an online collaboration platform, to help us brainstorm and refine potential topics for a research agenda in personalized medicine that are based on the principles we discussed today. Through the platform, users can suggest edits, propose edits to ideas, and vote to resolve edits or rank ideas Cynthia and I did a demo of the webinar, and we found that it was very easy to use, very user-friendly, and we will be making the platform open to all of the web forum participants, including you all, and anyone else interested in participating. Keep an eye out for those email invitations to participate sometime in February. And we're really excited to implement Code Digital in the next phase of our project because we believe it will help us maximize our engagement of the patient community as well as other stakeholders as we move into the next phase of translating these principles into research topics that could be funded by PCORI or elsewhere. And as for next steps, we will post this webinar recording, the slides, and the final principles on our website. If you visit our homepage, you can select the drop-down menu under Research and navigate to the name of our project, Moving Beyond Population Averages. As I mentioned, in February, we will invite you to participate in Code Digital, where we will refine the research topics and collect suggested topics. This summer, we will share a final white paper with the patient-centered principles and a final list of proposed research topics for the research agenda in personalized medicine. And then finally, and most importantly, you'll receive an evaluation survey for our final web forum. Please do take a moment to fill it out so we can see how we did. And, you know, even though this is the end of our web forum series, we will still, you know, incorporate your feedback into any other web forums that we decide to host in the future, engaging patients and the patient community. So with that, are there any additional comments or questions before we conclude today's call? And once again, to unmute your line, please press 4*. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us today and for our web forum series. We are really excited to move on to the next phase of our project, but we will miss convening you in this web forum series, but that does not mean the end of our communication. If you have any ideas about the project or are interested in getting involved in PMC's work elsewhere, please feel free to drop me or Cynthia a line. Our contact information is on this slide. And thank you so much. You really have been a pleasure to work with over the past year and a half. And Cynthia, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I would just echo what David said and agree wholeheartedly. And please let us know how else we can be helpful to you because you've been a great help to us.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great day.
Take care.